It's been some time since I've reviewed a SwampFox product. The first one was the ArrowHead 1 to 10 in second focal plane, which I really enjoyed. And the next was the KentuckyLong 2 to 12, which was sent in by SwampFox. I think some people thought that I had maybe faked that review a little bit, but the truth of the matter is that was a very good scope for what it was. This WarHawk 2 to 10 by 44 was sent in by a viewer, however, and a local person to me. He actually ran into me at the range one day, and we've been friends ever since, so thank you very much for him, because without him, we wouldn't be here watching this review, or at least I wouldn't be putting it together and you wouldn't be watching it. Before we go any further in depth about how this thing performs optically, let's take a good close look at it externally and then work our way inward. No external box was included with the scope when I was given it, so if you want to find out what the SwampFox box are like, go watch my other two reviews because I do have a full unboxing of those. As far as what you could expect from a SwampFox scope, well, you get branded scope caps, which are actually pretty decent, and two different length throw levers, or cattails in this case, but they do work extremely efficiently. As far as the quality of the flip caps, they're not bad. They're not the best, but they're included for the price, so how bad could they really be? This scope is, however, up against some very stiff competition. Most notably is going to be the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 2 to 12 by 42. It should be of no surprise to anybody that watches my channel in-depthly that this is, without a shadow or question of doubt, my favorite budget MPVO of this magnification range, the 2 to 10 and or 2 to 12. However, this scope and the WarHawk or the Warhorse or the War Chicken, however you want, whatever name the SwampFox goes by, are actually two kind of dissimilar optics, and I will be touching on that later on throughout the video. As far as the size and weight is concerned, however, the SwampFox is about an inch longer and a few ounces heavier, which you will be taking note of very soon. On top of the SwampFox coming with its own scope caps, it also comes with something that's really nice, a thread-on kill flash. Not many scopes in this price point really offer that, and for anyone that is interested in a kill flash, which all it does is kill any sort of reflection of a light source off the front lens downrange, well, guess what? It already comes included for the price. SwampFox on their website claims that this scope comes in at 29.7 ounces, but it's a little bit heavier on my scale. And the Athlon is only about 3 ounces heavier, including an amazing GG&G mount. As far as the fast focus eyepiece, it's got a nice little texture on the outside, which allows for pretty good purchase and grip on it, but it doesn't seem too obtrusive like it's going to grab on everything. There's a tiny bit of wiggle to the eyepiece when you back it all the way out and put it in about a quarter of a turn, but overall it's really not that bad. Keep in mind, this is roughly a $500 scope, so it's not like it's going to be on par with a $2,500 scope, or at least it shouldn't. SwampFox, from my experiences with them, this being my third one, really does feel like it's made out of lower quality materials. As far as the magnification ring, it's got a 180-degree throw, which is the average across most optics, regardless of what their magnification range is. It does spin fairly easily and smoothly. It's not like you're going to have a hard time wrenching on this. And if you do, you have these wonderfully, very smartly designed cattails, which, as you can see, have a perfect female cut on them of that little dovetail that encompasses and makes up the entire magnification ring. Simply slide it on precisely where you want it and tighten down the little set screw that's inside that hole on top to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And yes, there are usually two that are included. This is the longer one. There is a shorter one available inside the box. It's a really nice setup, and I wish other manufacturers would take note of this and implement something similar on their setups. On to the illumination control, which goes to 12 for some reason. There are offs in between each on position, and it does feel and sound pretty good. There's no real surprises here, and I have no doubt that it would function fine for quite some time. Really, yeah, I did that. There is one thing, however, that I don't like, and that is the cap for the battery compartment is not only the same diameter as the entire knob itself, it's even got the same splines on it. So it's very easy to accidentally just not grab enough of the illumination control and eventually work it loose if you constantly go counterclockwise off the face. Inside, we have a very standard low budget battery compartment, 3 dimples on the board, and 6 springs on the cap. But again, I've never really had an issue with this. This is what I wish companies would do. Vortex with the PST line have that cap that is recessed and requires a tool to open it, and I think it is one of the better on the market. The side parallax knob goes down to 10 yards, which is extremely close, and has almost a 360-degree rotation. The external splines that are on the knob itself are the exact same that you find on the magnification ring and the turrets, just on a very smaller scale. They don't need to have any sort of cattails get put onto them, so they're much shallower, but they are in the same vein, which is nice. I actually do prefer the fact that the illumination control and the side parallax are different textures. So this way, if you were grabbing one in a hurry, you know which one is which. As for the side parallax, how does it feel and sound? Well, there is no sound, which is a good thing, and it feels quite good. Nothing really bad to write home about. Finally, moving on to the turrets, and this is something that is vastly improved over the Kentucky Long. The Kentucky Long had only 6 mils per rotation, and of those 6 mils, if you had to reset the 0 on the cap, it only had 30 splines. What that means is, let's say you went from 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 of a click. Let's say you were at 0.1 of a click, and you wanted to reset the cap by unscrewing it and resetting it to 0. You couldn't do that because there was half as many splines as there were actual indications on the turrets themselves. So you couldn't possibly, there was a 50-50 chance you weren't going to be able to actually reset your zeros. And it was a real buzzkill and something I really critiqued that scope for. And only 6 mils per rotation is a little weak. There are a lot of scopes out there, even much smaller scopes than this. Keep in mind there's a 34mm tube. These turrets are actually quite large, but there are a lot of scopes out there that still manage to have 10 mils per rotation on small turrets and still work. These turrets right off the bat are much better designed. They're a good size, and they do have 10 full mils per rotation, and there's 10 tenths in each mil. So there are 100 possible clicks that we can have on these turrets, and there are 100 splines on the erectors on the inside. So yes, you can get a perfect 0 when you are resetting your 0. It's also very nice to note that once we unlock the cap, there is a line imprinted underneath where the cap is. So this way you have a perfect lineup from where you are on the cap with the body, so you can make a more precise adjustment. However, look at those numbers. It goes from, in this case, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all the hash marks in between are all the same height. So if you were to go somewhere in between, like, I don't know, 3.5 mils, roughly where we are now, it's kind of hard to spot it using a larger hash mark in the middle to get you there faster. You're actually going to have to pay attention with either every click that you make audibly, you feel, or you're really going to have to start counting them visually, which is a big issue for me. It's not that hard to just add a slightly longer tick in the middle and all your problems would be solved. As far as how they sound and feel, however, well, let's take a closer look at that right now. There's also no rev indicator, so are you at 0 mils or plus 10? That's going to be an issue for some people as well. You'll also note that there's a lot of mush inside the click, which I am not a big fan of, but it's not terrible. But the one thing that I really had a hard time with, and you'll actually see me switch hands soon, is these turrets are so hard to turn that it actually will fatigue your hand if you had to do a lot of rotation with them. It's something that I've never really experienced before. You could also see that there is a lot of rock to the cap itself, and that is something that I couldn't really justify and explain as to why.
Those are very hard to turn.
The windage is set up more or less the same. It's the exact same turret, but at least the cap itself is set up properly for a windage. So a 0 and a 1 and a 1 and an indicator on the outside, so you know if you have to bring your shot to the left, you know which way to go. And same for the right. It's very simple and easy to pick up and use, and that's great. It's also got the same line on the erector body itself, so this way you know exactly what click you are supposed to be at, even if you lost count or you didn't hear it. However, again, there's still no larger hash mark in the middle, so if you had to go somewhere in between, you're going to have to pay attention to that. As far as how these caps work, well, the windage is a lot easier to disengage than the elevation. Pulling off the elevation cap, and you can see what we've got working on the inside. You have a nice big brass erector and those very, 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 very tiny splines on the inside. Now, there is no zero stop on these turrets. They're just zero resetting, which means that you can fine tune where your zero is. They used a touch of clever wordplay in the actual description on their website. Zero resettable is not the same as zero stop, so keep that in mind. So no zero stop and no rotational indicator is a little bit Is it the end of the world? It might be for some. At least you can actually properly set your zero on whatever turret that you're adjusting, which is, it should be kind of nice, but it's 2024. Every scope should be able to do that by now. All right, I think that's enough talking and complaining about some of the things that I'd like to see change and some of the things that they did change over the Kentucky Long and all of that fun jazz in between. Let's get behind it now and see if this thing at least performs well optically for the price. The reticle is the same RECCE or RECCE reticle found in the Kentucky Long 2-12 review that I did a couple of years ago now at this point. And it's a reticle that I don't hate, but I also don't love. Those posts at 3, 6, and 9 are extremely short. I don't know why they don't go full length. Personal preference aside, it still doesn't make much sense to me why most manufacturers don't extend their posts all the way. All it does is make your reticle less usable at lower magnifications, which is a bit of a buzzkill. A lot of manufacturers rely heavily on using illumination to draw your eye towards the center, but I'd prefer just having a well thought out and usable reticle. However, the drops on this Christmas tree are very nice and easy to pick up and use, and the illumination is also quite nice as well. It will be a little bit harder to pick up some of the smaller drops and the dead center at lower magnification on very complicated targets, but in my findings, it could be much worse. There are other scopes that do a worse job of this. However, there are, of course, other scopes that do a much better job of this. But as a whole, it's not the worst reticle out there. If you really must have a different reticle other than the RECCE reticle, they do offer the sharpshooter, but only in MOA, and I can almost guarantee without having any experience behind it, it'll be harder to use than this in lower magnifications. SwampFox claims that this is a precision rifle scope, so let's see how well it tracks. Adjusting the side parallax there real quick yields that neither the reticle nor the target shift too much from one another. The same thing when we increase and decrease the magnification, the reticle stays directly on target. The reticle also lines up to my target extremely well, which is a wonderful sight to see every single time it happens. As far as play in the erectors, both windage and elevation, there was nothing that I was able to distinguish with my eye. Everything seemed to move exactly as it should have, and there was no issues with it. Another thing to take note of is at 10 mils all the way down to the bottom of the target and the reticle is slightly canted. It's canted to the right. Every once in a while, I can't get it much better than how it looks, so we have to keep that in mind when we finally get to the plus 10 mils. But for my little step test, 4 over 4 up, it lines up perfectly. Resetting the windage back to 0, and it favors the right side of that edge only because the reticle itself isn't 100% clocked, or rather the scope isn't 100% clocked to the target. Increasing the elevation to a total of 10 mils, and you will see that it is bang on perfect for the elevation, but when it comes to the windage, it's favoring the right hand side line a little bit. That is because when we bring this back to its 0, if you look all the way down to 10 mils, it is favoring the right hand side line. So the tracking performance on this thing is bang on perfect. When you first get behind this scope and you take it out to any distance at anything, the first thing you're going to notice is that the view looking through it is wonderfully large. The amount of scope body that you can see off to the far left corner is medium. It's not too big, and it's not as razor thin as, well, a Razr HD. It is perfectly adequate and acceptable. The illumination here is a little bit on the weaker side. You can't really tell that it's there. However, the side parallax has been adjusted to about the 35 yards that this transformer is currently distanced at. Take note, as I slowly increase the magnification, that reticle does become a little bit easier to see around the 3 or 4x mark. At 2x, even on something as simple as this, it's still a little bit tricky to see. That just means that if you are focusing on a target in a more congested or cluttered area, it might be completely impossible to see. I tweaked the side parallax a little bit to see if we can eke a little bit more clarity out of the image, even though it was already basically pretty good where I had set it to, and it seems, well, that was about as good as we were going to get. This is a very harsh sort of light because it is early morning in the late fall, and every once in a while when the sun's just cresting over the horizon a certain way, it really does make the whole lighting environment a little bit more challenging for glass to render. Moving our attention to the 400-yard brick building, you can just make out that center crosshair on a pretty simple target, all things considered. But look at the trees just left of dead center. That reticle really does get eaten up by the trees. So if you are, let's say, shooting in a wooded area a lot and you want to keep your magnification on the lower end, it's going to be a little bit tricky to use this thing effectively. With the side parallax yet again set to roughly the 400 yards that this brick building is away from us, I slowly increase the magnification to see if it's going to not only be more or less where it needs to be, but also to check and see what the clarity of this glass really is. Again, that side parallax looks bang on perfect to me. I will fine tune it a little bit more to see if we can eke a little bit more out of it. But until then, that is a wonderful looking image. That tree line to the far left is like around the 250, 300 yard mark. Again, the brick building's at 400 yards and the trees behind it are 700 to 800 yards away. The depth of field on this thing at maximum magnification is super impressive. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's sharp, clear, and crisp. Edge-to-edge sharpness is fantastic. It's not like only the center is sharp and everything else falls away. Far from it. It truly is beautiful. Bring down the magnification to around 6x, and you are again greeted with an even better looking image. The field of view on this scope is quite impressive, all things considered. At the minimum of 2x, we have 62.6 feet, and at the maximum, 12.5 feet at 100 yards. So that gives you a good enough representation at 400 yards. It's going to be, 4 times that. Again, the RECCE reticle really comes to life around the 4 or 5x mark, and beyond that, it really is wonderful, especially if you're trying to make a more precise shot. As far as distortion to the glass, I pan over the power lines, and you're not really going to see that much distortion, maybe a little bit on the outer edge. Typically, you're going to have the most distortion in LPVOs that go down to 1x, and they stretch really far into like the 6, 8, or 10x magnifiers. Here, you're not really going to notice it, again, because it's, a 2x at minimum, but it's also only a 5x magnifier. 5x magnifiers have been out for a very long time, and lo and behold, even companies like SwampFox can churn out something that looks as good as this for a very inexpensive price point. At 900 yards on this power tower at 10x, we are once again greeted with a very lovely looking image. Everything seems sharp, clear, and crisp, and to my eye, it doesn't seem like there's any real purple fringing. Taking our camera and moving it slightly off center yields a very stable looking image. Both the reticle and the target downrange remain sharp, clear, and crisp to one another, even when we are way off dead center. Also, it does have a very forgiving exit pupil at 10x. SwampFox claims it's about 3.8 millimeter, which is pretty good. I pull the magnification back to 6x and once again start shifting the camera side to side to see how well it performs. At the very extremes, it will start to fall apart, but we get pretty far off center before it really gets to that point of degradation. At 2x, however, it seems to be even worse, but that's because we are getting significantly farther off center at this point before we can't see through the scope anymore. SwampFox again claims at its minimum, it's got 13 millimeters of exit pupil size, which is very large. So really not terrible. In a more dynamic approach with the illumination on full at 2x, you could really dance around this thing. It's a very good performance, and you can see that we can get just behind it in just the right position and distance where that perimeter around the scope, that scope body sort of disappears. Very razorish. Unfortunately, you can't really get that because this does have a sliding scale as far as eye relief goes. Again, around 6x, it's a very good performance. That's where the reticle really starts to come into its own. The illumination is very clearly visible here on a very overcast day. And again, you have a very forgiving exit pupil and eye box. It really is quite good. Increasing the magnification finally to its maximum of 10x. And yet again, we have what appears to be a pretty forgiving eye box. And that's because it is. I found that it was very easy to get behind this thing at any magnification in even pretty tricky positions. It's one of this thing's party pieces. Part of it has to do with the 44mm front objective, maybe even with the fact that it's got a 34mm tube, and it's just got the right sort of ratios going on inside. At 1,000 yards here at 10x, we have a very beautiful looking image. Air distortion is minimal. It wasn't that cold outside versus inside my apartment, so we don't have a ton of mirage. And those colors on those trees in late fall are just wonderful. It really makes me want to drink a nice cold cider and sit by a fire pit, but I gotta wait a few months before that happens. But having an image here that is quite nice is all fine and dandy, but if you were actually engaging at 1,000 yards, you're going to have to increase your elevation unless you are using the drops in the reticle. So I go up a standard of 10 mils and reacquire my more or less 0, and I have to say, I didn't really notice a loss of colors, sharpness, or clarity to the image. In fact, the eye box didn't even shift, again primarily because the exit pupil is so large that we have so much more allowance for movement behind it. It's really, really good performance. In fact, it's so good, I increase it a couple of more mils until I run out of travel and I bring it back up. I think this was somewhere around like 14 mils on my 50-yard 0 for a 22 LR. It might lose a little bit of sharpness, but overall it's still a very usable image, and this is a much better performance than a lot of other scopes, even with a much higher price tag. Impressive. The 2 to 10 really is a versatile magnification range. Not only could you use it in a tactical-ish sort of setup, but you might also want to cross it over into a more hunting-ish setup, even if it is a little bit on the heavy side. So, how does it do in low light environments? It is very clearly late evening at the end of the fall, and these are perfect environments where you might be out in the field somewhere hunting game. Slowly increasing the magnification to its maximum, focusing on our 400-yard brick building. And alas, I don't see any real loss of sharpness, clarity, or brightness to the image, more importantly. Illumination on full does seem a little bit on the weaker side. I will say that the Kentucky Long did seem like it had brighter illumination. And would I prefer brighter illumination? Of course I would, because you could always dial it down to the brightness setting that you need in lower light environments such as this. But if you want it in a brighter environment, well, you're kind of SOL at that point. Overall, I think it's good enough, but it could always be improved. Continuing right along with our side-by-side comparisons. On the left will be the WarHawk, and we're going to start out with its brother, the Kentucky Long 2 to 12. Now, on paper, there are a lot of differences between these two, but the biggest one you're going to notice is the view looking through it. Both of these feature the RECCE reticle, like I've already mentioned, and at 2x they look the same, but the Kentucky Long does have a maximum of 12x versus the WarHawk's 10x. Is that much of a difference, however, especially when the view through the WarHawk is as substantial as it is? It does seem much larger here than the Kentucky Long, and that is something you will notice, especially if you get behind these things side by side. As far as the price point, we already talked about the WarHawk horse, Jesus Christ, I call it everything but its actual name. Mid 500s. Kentucky Long, about low to mid 400s. Again, if you're an LEO first responder, blah, 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 you will be able to get these for much cheaper through SwampFox directly. But if you're not, these are the prices that you can typically find them at. Lengthwise, the Warhorse is about a ½ inch longer. It's also about 3 ounces or so heavier. However, due to the fact that you have a much larger view looking through the Warhorse, it has a much larger field of view. And at its minimum, the Warhorse is 62.6 feet versus 54.5 feet. That is substantially larger. At the maximum, it's going to be a little bit different, again, because not only do we have a larger view with the Warhorse, but we have 2 fewer X with it. So it goes from 12.5 feet to 9.3 feet with the Kentucky Long. As far as our exit pupils are concerned, at least on paper, they're about on par with one another, but you will notice the better advantage going again to the Warhorse. Eye relief is another thing that has to be mentioned, and both of these have a shifting eye relief, meaning that as you increase the magnification, your eye relief is going to get a little bit tighter, and as a result of that, you will notice that, especially in the dynamic approach to the Eyebox on this, you saw that you could get a very small perimeter around it, but that is not obtainable at higher magnifications, again, because the eye relief changes. Which one do I prefer and why? Price aside, I have to go with the Warhorse. It is a substantially better looking optic externally. It's got a much larger view looking through it. The Kentucky Long is a very good optic optically. Its image is very good, and that was one thing that I was really fond of, so much so that I still have it in a set of rings that I throw on my airsoft gun every once in a while just to play around with that, and it's been fun and fine for that. I think it's an excellent scope if you're on a tight budget and you want the options that it offers. However, if I was looking at these two side by side and I had to choose a winner for many different reasons, whether it be aesthetics, optical performance, tracking performance, you name it, the Warhorse is the better optic. It's got a few things going for it that I really like, and aesthetically, it is a very pleasing scope to look at. And that's actually something that I'm going to touch on more in the final thoughts segment at the end of all these comparisons, but it really does fit a nice motif. Again, between these two optically, they're basically using the same glass, but the view looking through the Warhorse absolutely just dominates what the Kentucky Long is capable of producing, and it's for that reason alone that I'd go with the Warhorse. But there's a lot of other reasons why I would choose it as well. The biggest problem with the Kentucky Long is the Helos BTR Gen 2 2-12 exists, and in my opinion, I prefer that scope over the Kentucky Long in almost every single facet. Different strokes for different folks. You might get the SwampFox for much less expensive than the Athlon. You might prefer the Reticle. You might prefer its overall feature set. And you know what? That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But between these two, the Warhorse is definitely an evolutionary step forward, and that is something that everyone can appreciate. Now, truth be told, I don't know why I included the Vortex Viper PST Gen 1 2.5 to 10 by 32 MBVO in this comparison, but I am. I think I'm doing it primarily because you might want to buy a very good quality Filipino-made Vortex versus a SwampFox. Completely understandable and justifiable. But there are a lot of differences between these two. Just like with the Kentucky Long, the view through the PST Gen 1 is extremely small, and that is something that you can't really get around. The glass in the PST Gen 1, though, is excellent. It is so tastefully done. It is beautiful. It is sharp. It is clear. It is bright. Despite the fact that it only has a 32mm front objective, it lets in a lot of light up to about 9-ish x. 10 does taper off slightly, but boy, oh boy, is it wonderful. Another amazing talking point and selling point for the PST is the weight. At under 19 ounces, it is less than 2/3 the weight of the Warhorse, and that's pretty friggin' impressive. However, the turrets on the PST are showing their age a lot. The shims that you have to put under there for a zero stop can possibly have you jam the erector and break it. And I don't know how many times Vortex can repair a PST anymore before they have to just replace it. And if they can't repair it, they're going to replace it. And they're probably going to replace it with a PST Gen 2. Even though I don't have any hands-on experience with it, it still offers the same sort of feature set as the PST Gen 1, just more modernized and updated. And it still doesn't have locking turrets, and it still has really odd, shitty reticles. And for that alone, for the weight, there are a lot of other options that I'd rather go with. But you might be finding a PST Gen 1 for about the same price as the WarHawk, and that alone is a compelling argument. But which one would I choose? I would choose the Warhorse because it is the better overall package, albeit it's made in China versus the Philippines, and for many people, that is absolutely a reason to go with one versus the other. For me nowadays, the Chinese market is extremely strong. They make a lot of good stuff. Would I trust my life to it all the time? Not necessarily. But if you're between the PST Gen 1 and a Warhorse, the Warhorse is the much stronger optic in many different ways. See, you're really talking up the Warhorse really, really high. How does it compare to your scope of the year for 2023, the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 2-12x42? Well, yet again, there are a lot of differences between these two scopes. Most notably, the reticle in this case. The AHMR2 from the Athlon is something that I think is absolutely perfect for the magnification range. A lot of people have critiqued it, especially its center dot, which is about 1 MOA. And I think that they're just bench shooters that really want more magnification to try to shoot small and tiny groups, whereas I'm a more practical shooter and I'm just more worried about making an impact on a target at distance. Also, in as fast of time as possible, and to do that, you need a reticle that you could actually see at all of the magnification range. And the Helos does an exceptionally good job of this. The Helos also does an exceptionally good job with the view looking through it. As big as the Warhorse is, the Helos is right there alongside of it. The Helos really is a scope package that is, as I've said many times, as good as you can get for the price point. These Helos can still be found for the mid 400s, which is still $100 less expensive than the WarHawk. Glass-wise, I may give it to the Warhorse by a very tiny margin. The Warhorse is extremely sharp and clear. The Helos does seem a little bit muted at times, but not so muted and so lower down compared to the Warhorse that I would choose the Warhorse over the Helos for that one reason alone. All of the touch points on the Helos are better than the Warhorse, especially the turrets. They are exceptional. It doesn't track as good as the Warhorse, but it's still repeatable and close enough to spec for especially when compared to a lot of other high dollar scopes. And I never had a problem with it. I've dialed it out to about 4 mils at about 600 yards, and again, really haven't had an issue with it as far as being repeatable and, well, just easy to use. In my opinion, the Helos is the better overall package for a number of reasons, but you might be looking for a different aesthetic, again with a larger tube and just a more chunky looking scope for whatever build you might be going for. And you might want to go for the Warhorse, or maybe you prefer the reticle options with the Warhorse. Maybe you want that little bit sharper, clearer glass, and I will have to give it to the Warhorse in that regard. But everything else, it's the Helos. My last comparison is with a scope that costs roughly 5 times the price of the Warhorse, and that is the Leupold Mark V HD 2-10x30. This features the illuminated TMR reticle, and say what you will about the TMR. And you know what, I'll say it too. It is a very outdated reticle, but it works well enough in this 2 to 2.5 to 10 magnification range. Would I like to see a more updated version of the TMR with maybe some, I don't know, Christmas tree sort of motifs to the bottom? Maybe a little donut around the middle? Maybe I would. And I'm sure a lot of other people would love to see an updated TMR from Leupold. Will they do it? Probably not, because Leupold is the absolute worst when it comes to reticle designs and adaptations. Leupold, if you're watching this, which I highly doubt you are, please make better reticles. It's like the number one thing that's holding your entire brand back are friggin' reticles. Please stop. Despite the massive price difference between these two, optically, they're actually very close to one another. The Warhorse also has a much larger view looking through this $2,500 Mark V HD. And that just makes me laugh. It makes me laugh. Leupold and most other scope manufacturers usually keep the view looking through the scope a little bit smaller to increase sharpness and resolution. Yet SwampFox was able to have their glass look as good as it does with having a massive view looking through it. Just makes me wonder why some manufacturers do things the way that they do. Regardless, though, the Leupold Mark V HD is made in the US, whereas the Warhorse is made in China. The materials used for the Leupolds are extremely high quality, and all the controls and touch points are fantastic. Would I recommend the Mark V HD over the Warhorse if your life depended on a scope to work and function whenever you needed it to? Yes, spend the money. Or you could spend twice the price of the Warhorse on the Mark IV HD 2.5 to 10 by 42, which I have not done any sort of filming on yet, which is why it's not brought into this comparison. Is that a boo-boo on my end? Maybe, but I will be rolling in some Warhorse footage on that review comparison, so you'll be able to get a better view of it. Between these two, though, optically, there really isn't that much difference between them. Control-wise, fit and finish, and quality-wise, well, that's a completely different story. At the end of it all, this Warhorse, WarHawk, War Chicken, whatever the hell you want to call it, is a step in the right direction for SwampFox. It makes some very important, in my opinion, changes from the KentuckyLong, which were kind of stupid. But I do think that there's still a lot of room for improvement on the next generation scopes from SwampFox. If SwampFox can roll out some features that I would love to see, and I'm sure many of you would like to see, maybe a more tweaked reticle, maybe a zero stop, maybe turrets that aren't impossible to turn and then also wiggle and wobble all over the place, maybe some things like that, and still manage the view looking through it, the glass sharpness and clarity as this, and keep the price point roughly the same. If SwampFox can do that, and if you're listening, SwampFox, I really hope you can, because if you can, your next generation scopes will be wildly popular and definitely have a competitive edge against much of the competition out there. I don't know how SwampFox scopes are selling. I don't know if they're selling well. I don't know if they're selling bad. I have no communication with SwampFox anymore since my contact left, but I have no ill will towards them. I think this is a very fine scope. Optically, it really is sensational. And the reticle above, again, the midway mark, magnification-wise, 4 or 5x, really starts to work its way into being a very capable, precision-ish reticle. I do wish that it did have longer posts at 3, 6, and 9. I do wish that maybe there was a donut around dead center, so at the lower magnifications, you could draw your eye to it much faster, easier, and more efficiently. And that's all stuff that they could very easily achieve and accomplish with very minimal work. However, if there's one thing that I've noticed that manufacturers of scopes do very poorly, it's roll out updated reticles for their lineup. I know that it must be very expensive to prototype and then build out and then test it and see if there's good feedback on it. I get that. But it would at least be nice to know that there's a different option out there that would just make more sense given the magnification range. All in all, I'm not complaining about the scope as much as I am just trying to steer SwampFox into a better direction, because if they can bring out a better product from their lineup, the only people that benefit from that are all of us. And really, that's all that matters. Who do I recommend the scope for? If you are building a low-budget SPR, and you want a chunky looking scope to go on top of it that has exceptional glass, good enough controls, and at least in this case, something that tracks almost perfectly, well then I would give this scope the green light for you. If you're looking for a scope that is around the same price, maybe a little bit less expensive, and performs more or less the same, maybe a little bit less, give the KentuckyLong a look. But my number one recommendation will still go to the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2. It's been proven for me. It's gone through many a match and has come back to me unscathed, more or less. It's got all the features that I love and want to see in a scope. It's just such a well-rounded package. Or if you want to spend more money than this on a American-made scope, absolutely check out the Leupold Mark IV HD 2.5 to 10 by 42 with the illuminated first focal plane TMR reticle. It might be lackluster in a couple of areas, but overall that is a phenomenal scope and one that I can't wait to finish the review on. Anyway, a huge thank you to the individual for sending this in for review. I really have cherished every moment with it. And with that, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.